The eviction notice was duct taped to my front door like some passive-aggressive middle school prank. Red lettering, bold font, signed by the HOA president herself, Nancy Lindell. I was halfway through my coffee when I saw it, still in my slippers, and I laughed out loud. Not one of those polite chuckles, either. A full-on, belly shaking, "What the hell do they think they're doing?" laugh. Effective immediately, it read. You are to vacate the premises due to repeated violations of community standards. What violations? I mow my lawn, keep my place clean, and don't throw wild parties. I'm a quiet guy. I'm Xander Whitlow, for crying out loud. The guy who everyone waves to but doesn't really know much about, and that's exactly how I liked it until now. I tossed the paper on my kitchen counter and walked straight to the HOA office, which was unfortunately inside Nancy's garage. She had turned it into her little kingdom. Neighborhood bylaws printed on laminated signs, a giant corkboard with pushpins, and a Keurig machine like it was some kind of war room. Nancy looked up from her headset, her platinum bob stiff with hairspray. "Oh, Xander," she said, her voice syrupy with fake concern. "I didn't expect you to come so soon. You received the notice." "You bet I did," I said, arms crossed. "You want to tell me why I'm being evicted from my own home?" She blinked like I'd asked her to explain quantum physics. "You've violated Regulation 12, Clause B. Your truck has been parked in your driveway overnight for 3 consecutive days. That's prohibited." I stared at her deadpan. "That's your reason. Rules are rules," she said, standing up like she was some kind of sheriff. "And we voted. You're out, effective today." "You voted?" I scoffed. "Nancy, you can't evict someone from their own property over a parked truck." She gave me that smug little smile only people drunk on fake power can muster. "We have authority. You agreed to the HOA terms when you moved in." I leaned in, dropping my voice. "Here's the thing, I didn't move in. I own this land." She blinked again, confused now. "What are you talking about? I'm your landlord, Nancy. I bought this entire development 6 months ago. I own every square inch of land this HOA claims control over, including your house." Her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. "That's not possible." I pulled out my phone, scrolled to the deed, and held it up. "Recorded and filed with the county. I bought out the original developer when the HOA defaulted on a landscaping loan last year. You didn't read the fine print, did you? The HOA transferred its land rights as collateral. When they missed the payments, I acquired it." Quietly, she paled. "This is a misunderstanding." Nope, I cut her off. "You tried to evict me from property I own. That's attempted fraud and abuse of power, both of which I've documented." "You can't do this," she hissed, her composure slipping. "Oh, I can, and I will. Every board member who voted for that eviction, they're getting notices of their own, not evictions. Just lease renewals with new terms." I turned and walked out before she could say another word, and that's when the real war started. The next morning, I found a community emergency hearing flyer duct taped to my mailbox. Same font as the eviction notice, same cheap paper. Scheduled for that evening at the clubhouse. Also HOA controlled, naturally. The wording danced around legal terms they clearly didn't understand, something about reviewing property status discrepancies and temporary suspension of governance rights pending clarification. Translation: they were scrambling. I got there 10 minutes early. The place was already packed. Folding chairs in crooked rows, fluorescent lights humming above, and a podium dragged to the front like it was about to witness a trial. Nancy stood near it, talking in low, panicked tones with her inner circle 3 retirees and a guy who delivered pest control flyers door to door but somehow held the title of security liaison. I didn't sit. I stood at the back, arms crossed, watching them pretend they weren't watching me. When the clock hit 6, Nancy tapped the mic and cleared her throat. "This emergency session of the Maple Lane Homeowners Association is now in order," she declared, overpronouncing every syllable like she was addressing a courtroom. "We have reason to believe there has been a clerical error in the transfer of community land titles. We'll begin by reviewing the documentation provided by Mr. Whitlow. I walked to the front, pulled a folder from my jacket, and laid out 6 certified copies of the deed transfer, the lien default, and the foreclosure judgment that led to the acquisition. All stamped by the county recorder's office. "Here's everything," I said, voice steady. "I own the land under every house in this development, including the clubhouse we're standing in. The HOA no longer has legal authority over the land since it was forfeited as debt collateral. You never informed the residents of the default, which violates state disclosure laws." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Nancy tapped the mic again, harder this time. "These documents may not be legitimate. We've retained a property attorney to—" "No, you haven't," I interrupted. "I called every land use lawyer in the Tri-County area yesterday. Not one of them had even heard from you." A man from the front row stood Frank, the Vietnam vet who lived 2 doors down from me. "Is it true that the HOA defaulted on a loan without telling anybody?" Nancy opened her mouth, but another board member, Gerald, who usually handled landscaping contracts, spoke up first. "We didn't think it was that serious," he said, not meeting anyone's eyes. Nancy said it was a short-term bridge loan to cover irrigation upgrades. "Upgrades that never happened," I added. "And the vendor you wrote the check to doesn't exist. I ran the EIN through the state database. It's fake." A woman near the back, a high school PE teacher named Laura, stood up. "Wait, are you saying HOA funds were used to pay a fake company?" "Not just that," I said. "There's more." I pulled out a second folder. This one contained bank statements I'd subpoenaed 2 weeks ago by filing a quiet title action. Nancy had been funneling HOA funds into a shell account registered under her cousin's name. Over $70,000 in the past year alone. Gasps filled the room. Nobody sat still anymore. "I've already filed a formal complaint with the DA," I continued. "Wire fraud, embezzlement. Violation of the Homeowners Association Transparency Act. It's all in there." Nancy lunged for the microphone, face flushed. "This is a personal attack," she shouted. "He's trying to destabilize our community." "No," I said calmly. "You did that all on your own." That's when the police arrived. 2 officers, plainclothes, stepped through the door and asked for Nancy Lindell by name. She tried to argue, claimed diplomatic immunity as a neighborhood official, which earned her an eye roll and a pair of handcuffs. As she was escorted out, she turned to me and hissed, "You'll regret this." I didn't reply. I just watched as she disappeared out the door, her power unraveling with every step. When the door shut, silence fell. Then Frank stood again. "So now what?" "Now," I said, "we rebuild. No more secret votes, no more mystery fines, and definitely no more duct taping threats to doors." A few people chuckled, but no one was really laughing yet. The shock hadn't worn off. I spent the next 2 weeks drafting a new charter. Not a homeowners association, those days were over, but a neighborhood council. Voluntary, transparent, and advisory only. No fines. No enforcement. Just neighbors helping neighbors. At the first meeting, we voted to convert the old HOA office into a community garden. Nancy's corkboard was torn down and used as mulch. Her Keurig was donated to the local fire station. We also reviewed every fine issued over the past year. 92% were baseless. I helped residents file reimbursement claims through small claims court. We even set up a legal fund for anyone who needed help filing. One guy, a mechanic named Julian, had been fined over $800 for unauthorized vehicle repairs in his driveway. All he'd done was change his wife's brake pads. He got every penny back, plus court fees. The pest control guy resigned from the board before I even had to confront him. Moved out 2 weeks later, claiming he was sick of the drama. Gerald stuck around. He apologized genuinely and joined the new council. Turns out he was just swept up in Nancy's bluffing and didn't know how to push back. I gave him a chance. So did the others. By the end of the month, the neighborhood had changed. Kids played in front yards again. People hosted barbecues without worrying about noise citations. We even painted a public mural on the side of the clubhouse. I didn't do it for power. I never wanted that. I just wanted to be left alone. But when someone tries to kick you out of your own home using rules they don't understand, twisting authority they don't even have, well, that's when you stop being quiet. That's when you stand up and take back what's yours. The county assessor's office received a curious visitor 2 weeks after Nancy's arrest. A man in a charcoal suit, early 50s, thin frame, with a leather briefcase that looked older than some of the buildings downtown. He handed the clerk a sealed envelope and asked for a certified copy of all land parcel records tied to Maple Lane Estates since its founding. The clerk, a college intern filling in while the regular staff took lunch, buzzed the supervisor instead. By the following morning, a formal inquiry had been launched by the State Division of Real Estate Oversight. Turns out, Nancy's shell company hadn't just bled HOA funds, it had also filed fraudulent zoning permits in an attempt to carve off a strip of greenbelt behind 4 homes and sell it to a commercial developer. The land was part of a protected easement, originally set aside when the development was approved 15 years ago. No one had even noticed the forged paperwork until my deed filing triggered a cross-check. I was called to testify at the county hearing. Not just as a witness, but as the legal owner of the property in question. I hadn't planned on getting involved with anything past cleaning up the neighborhood, but when a state investigator handed me a subpoena with my name spelled exactly right, I figured I'd better show up. The hearing room was nothing like the HOA war room. It had high ceilings, wood paneling, and microphones that actually worked. A judge sat at the center, flanked by 2 state commissioners. Nancy wasn't present. Her lawyer had entered a plea on her behalf for the embezzlement charges, but her name came up frequently. The state's attorney gestured to the map projected on the wall. This strip of land, marked as Parcel 114B, was recorded as a recreational easement under the original development agreement. Yet 4 months ago, an application was submitted to reclassify this acreage for commercial use, citing a non-existent community vote and a forged deed transfer. I leaned forward into the mic. That deed was never issued by me, nor was there any vote. I reviewed the signatures on the application. At least 6 are from homeowners who'd moved out years ago. One of them passed away in 2019. The commissioner to the left blinked. And you're confirming under oath that no such transfer or vote took place, correct? I only discovered the forged document after retrieving the full parcel history from the county archives. The judge leaned back, fingers steepled. Well, that escalated. The room chuckled briefly, but the weight of the fraud hung heavy. The damage wasn't just financial, it was systemic. Nancy had tried to reroute zoning protections to profit off land she had no right to touch. After the hearing, I was approached by one of the homeowners whose backyard bordered the easement. A contractor named Alois, mid-30s, with calloused hands and a clipboard tucked under her arm. She tried to sell my kid's favorite sledding hill to a mattress warehouse, she said. I want in on whatever you're doing next. I told her I wasn't doing anything next, not officially, but she insisted. So did 3 others. Within a week, we had a working group. Homeowners with legal, construction, and planning experience, all ready to help reestablish Maple Lane with real structure without the HOA's former chokehold. We named it the Maple Land Committee. No dues, no hierarchy, just project-based volunteers. Our first initiative was restoring that greenbelt. Alois led the regrading efforts. We planted native trees, installed benches using reclaimed wood from the old HOA storage shed, and added a gravel trail that looped through the entire strip. A new sign went up, "Community easement protected by deed and neighbors." Meanwhile, the criminal case against Nancy unfolded in the background. Her cousin rolled over fast, trading testimony for immunity. Turns out, the fake vendor used to funnel HOA funds had been registered to a P.O. box rented under an alias. The paper trail was thin, but enough connected back to Nancy's personal accounts to secure charges for wire fraud, forgery, and misappropriation of community-managed assets. I was called again this time, not to testify, but to consult. The county prosecutor wanted to understand how the HOA's charter had allowed such unchecked control. I brought in the original bylaws, the amended versions Nancy had pushed through, and a flowchart I'd sketched on a napkin that showed how she'd centralized voting power through procedural loopholes. "See here," I pointed. She added a clause that allowed emergency votes during natural disruptions. She classified a sprinkler main break as one, then used that session to install herself as acting treasurer when the original one resigned. The prosecutor laughed. "That's not even clever. Just desperate. Desperate people make bold moves when they think no one's watching." He nodded, then asked if I'd consider joining a task force to review HOA abuse cases statewide. I declined, not because I wasn't interested, but because I already had my hands full. The Maple Land Committee had uncovered a second issue, one that had nothing to do with Nancy, but everything to do with the original developer. The sidewalks on the east side of the neighborhood hadn't been poured to code. They were 2 inches thinner than spec, and the subbase was improperly compacted. This explained why they cracked every winter like old tile. We brought it to the city's planning department. They were surprised at first, then embarrassed. Turns out, inspections had been skipped a favor to the developer who'd contributed to the mayor's last campaign. That connection didn't go unnoticed. A local journalist got wind of it and ran a 3-page spread under the headline, "Small Neighborhood, Big Cracks in the System." I didn't speak to the press, but I did get a letter from the city manager offering to fully fund the sidewalk replacement. No strings attached. Just a quiet apology and a promise of oversight moving forward. One evening, while reviewing the new sidewalk blueprint on my porch, Gerald wandered over. He'd avoided the meetings lately, mostly out of guilt, I guessed. "Didn't think you'd stick around," he said, watching the sun dip behind the rooftops. "I thought about leaving," I admitted. "But then I realized, if I did, someone like Nancy would just slither back in." He nodded slowly, hands in his pockets. "I was wrong about her." "About all of it. You weren't the only one." There was a pause before he spoke again. "Do you think people will trust leadership again? After all the damage, I don't think they have to. They just need to trust each other." He looked down at his shoes, then back up. "You ever think about running for council? The real one. City, I mean," I laughed. Couldn't help it. "No, I'm good right here." A few days later, the Department of Real Estate sent a final report. Alongside Nancy's charges, they listed Maple Lane as a case study in corrective ownership transition. Apparently, that was their term for what happened when someone like me ended up owning a failed HOA development and actually used that power to fix things. I didn't care for the label. Too clinical. But I appreciated the recognition. Nancy pled guilty on 3 charges. She took a deal: 5 years probation, restitution, and community service. Part of that service included helping clean up the public park downtown. Alois saw her there once, pulling weeds in the rain. "She didn't look at anyone," she told me later. "Good. Let her have some silence for once." The neighborhood moved on, not all at once, but gradually. The threat was gone, but the memory stuck around like a scar, a reminder of how fragile peace can be when power's unchecked. I still kept my truck in the driveway, still waved to neighbors I didn't know well. But now some of them waved back and crossed the street to talk. We built something better than an HOA. We built trust, and that's one thing no charter can fake. The first week of spring brought a shift in the air: warmer mornings, longer evenings, and a citywide audit notice that landed in my mailbox with an official county seal. It wasn't unexpected. After the zoning fraud unraveled, and Nancy's financial misdeeds made rounds through state channels, the Department of Municipal Review had begun combing through all linked assets. Maple Lane Estates, with its tangled HOA web and suspicious financials, was a red flag with flashing lights. The audit wasn't focused on me, I'd already been cleared, but on the broader question. How deep did the corruption actually go? I stepped into the old HOA archive room, now repurposed as a temporary review office, and unlocked the steel cabinet that used to house Nancy's compliance reports. Inside, I found 3 file boxes marked with faded labels and a 4th that hadn't been cataloged. The handwriting on the lid was different, sloppier, almost rushed. Inside that box was a stack of old maintenance invoices, most of them rubber stamped with the HOA's signature. At first glance, they looked ordinary roofing repairs, sprinkler parts, pest control. But the vendors listed didn't match anything in the state contractor database. I cross-referenced street addresses. Every single one pointed to P.O. boxes in a neighboring city, all rented under different names. I flagged the documents and drove them downtown the next morning. The assistant district attorney, a woman named Leona Hargrove, met me in a windowless room with cinder block walls and a single humming fan. She flipped through the stack, pausing every few pages. "These dates line up with the embezzlement period," she said. "But this looks like a second scheme entirely." She pulled a report from her briefcase, an internal memo detailing a whistleblower complaint that had come in right after Nancy's arrest. Someone had tipped them off to a slush fund buried inside the HOA's landscaping budget. Not just embezzled money, but laundered past through fake vendors and then funneled into a real estate trust downtown. "Let me guess," I said. "That trust owns undeveloped commercial land." Leona nodded. 2 plots. One of them borders the elementary school, the other sits next to a wetlands preserve. I leaned back in the chair. "And let me guess again. Nancy had power of attorney over that trust." "Close. Her husband did. He filed for divorce 3 months ago, but the financials weren't separated. We're freezing the assets today." She didn't need to say the rest. What Nancy had done wasn't just neighborhood fraud. It was statewide land flipping, using HOA funds to buy up and rezone properties for private gain. All funneled through layers of false records and front companies. Leona closed the folder and looked up. "You willing to testify again?" I nodded without hesitation. "Whatever you need." 2 weeks later, the grand jury convened. Unlike the previous hearings, this one wasn't open to the public, but I was allowed to bring evidence, maps, contracts. The forged vendor applications. Even a digital trail emails I'd recovered from the HOA's old server, showing direct communication between Nancy and her husband about permit arrangements and accelerated zoning approvals. The jury didn't take long. Indictments were handed down within 3 days. Conspiracy to commit fraud, laundering public funds, and tampering with municipal records. Nancy's husband was arrested outside his office, still wearing his ID badge. His law license was suspended the same afternoon. Back in Maple Lane, the mood was cautious but hopeful. The garden behind the clubhouse had started blooming. Aloyse's team was expanding the trail, adding a native plant section with small wooden signs carved by local kids. The old HOA bulletin board had been turned into a community library filled with books donated by residents. Someone even left a copy of the bylaws with a note taped to the cover. History. Do not repeat. One afternoon, I was replacing a fence post near the trail when Gerald showed up with a clipboard under one arm and a paint-streaked glove on the other. "They're asking about installing solar lights along the path," he said. "Volunteers can handle it, but we need to approve the plan." I nodded. "Run it by the committee at the next meeting, no more top-down decisions." He looked at the post I was working on. "How's it feel being the guy who stopped all this?" I didn't stop it alone. "I just made enough noise that people started listening," he grinned. "Well, you're going to be on a few plaques when this is over. I'd rather just get the sidewalks poured right this time." He chuckled and wandered off, leaving me to finish the fence. The settlement hearing came 2 months later. Nancy appeared in person, this time without the stiff hair or fake pearls, just a plain suit, ill-fitting and wrinkled. Her lawyer did most of the talking, but the judge required her to speak when the restitution order was read. She stood, eyes fixed on the table, and whispered, "I accept." The total was just under $174,000, payable over 15 years with her assets liquidated to cover the first installment. The judge also barred her from serving on any housing board, civic council, or nonprofit organization for life. Outside the courthouse, I ran into Leona. She handed me a sealed envelope. "Final disposition," she said. And a little something from the AG's office. Inside was a certificate of civic contribution, signed by the Attorney General with a note acknowledging my role in exposing systemic fraud and preserving land use integrity. "Looks nice," I said. "I'll hang it next to my deed," she laughed. "You ever consider consulting for the state? We could use someone who understands how HOAs get away with this stuff." I shook my head. "I've got a trail to finish and a bench to install." She didn't press the issue. By summer, the neighborhood had transformed. Not just in appearance, but in rhythm. People walked more, talked more. A retired librarian started hosting story time every Saturday on the Greenbelt. Julian, the mechanic who'd once been fined for working in his driveway, started holding free car care classes for teens. One morning, I walked past the spot where the old HOA sign used to sit. In its place was a wooden marker, hand-carved and painted with the words, "Maple Lane, a neighborhood, not a corporation." I stopped and looked around. No enforcement patrols, no threats taped to doors. Just sunlight on the path, laughter from a nearby yard, and the sound of someone pushing a wheelbarrow in the distance. I didn't need a title to know I'd done the right thing. Owning the land beneath their feet gave me leverage. But what really changed everything was showing people they didn't need fear to keep things running, they just needed each other. The HOA tried to own the neighborhood through rules and intimidation. They didn't realize they were standing on my ground, and I wasn't going anywhere.